Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show, brought to you by the FTN Network. I am your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, that niche sports connoisseur. I don't have an intro yet, so we're rocking that 30-second countdown, getting us in the mood here. And as you can see, I am joined by a guest, a co-host, first of the season. It's going to be March 1st, and been flying solo the whole time. But we got our dear friend here, Adam Young. If you don't know him, he is a baseball award-nominated writer and extraordinaire, editor supreme. He does a lot of great things. His tilting is on par, although we're teaching him a little bit of nuance with that, but he's been awesome. Adam, I'm extremely excited you're here to join us, and I know the subs out there in the community are as well. Appreciate it. How are you feeling? How you doing? What's up? What's going on, brother?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. First of all, it's actually March right now here on the East Coast, 12:01 Eastern. So we're feeling pretty good. We always love when the calendar turns to March, and I'm just happy to be here.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, it's we had January in the rearview mirror. We've been turning that corner, and it's like in the blink of an eye, February is gone. Obviously, it's a shorter month, but definitely exciting. Lots of college basketball this weekend. Nuttily enough and crazy enough, there is conference tournament starting on Sunday. The A-Sun, led there by Lipscomb, is going to be taking place on Sunday. So conference tournaments beginning, and then as we get into Tuesday, there's the Sun Belt and a couple of others, and it's like we're off and running here. So it's absolutely insane to think about, and I'm really kind of sad about it because usually we get to the tournament and then the one shining moment, and I'm kind of like, damn, now what? So it's obviously there's a lot to be done still in baseball, of course, but yeah, definitely cherishing every single moment that we have here. If you are watching live, we appreciate it. If you're on YouTube especially, or on X/Twitter, please jump over to YouTube. Hitting us with those likes definitely help. Talk about it each and every show. Those interactions, comments, questions, concerns, retweets, reposts, likes, everything. We are in an algorithm-based world right now, and that helps our show a tremendous amount as we do some day shows, some night shows, and as we get past next week, we're going to start doing multiple, more than the 3 a week, probably 4 and 5, and then the Selection Sunday show, which is going to be coming up before you know it, less than 17 days. Crazy to think about there. Lots going on. Tomorrow/today, depending on where you are, has a ton of games. There's a 10-game main slate. That's going to be the primary focus of this evening show. There's also a 9-game afternoon slate and a 9-game night slate. So those 3 over on DraftKings, and I believe FanDuel has their main and a night slate as well. You'll also notice there's a late night slate on DraftKings. That is a 3-gamer, but that is 3 games that are from the night slate. So it's not a unique game set, but it is for, if you're going all out and you have a rough night slate and you want to play one more time, you do have that 3-game late night set. And one thing I'll say, and we've noticed as the day goes on Saturday and Sunday, the news that drops gets missed. Just a few days ago, even on the late night slate with Arkansas, we knew Adu Tierra wasn't going to play in that one. Trevon Brazil, Jonas Idu, both super low owned, both produced quite well. Brazil even started. He was 17%. We won't have that low of ownership this slate here, which we'll get into here in a little bit. But it just goes to show you that continually that news-based edge, mid-slate swaps have been the key to our success, and we are finding a lot of green screens here the last week or so. So that's really refreshing and great to see. As far as the Mania goes, there are still plenty of opportunities. It's on number 47 now at the $60 level. So if you have not qualified yet, still have that chance. There are several in our community that have 2 and 3. EWR, I think, is maxed out or near maxed out. So congrats to him. And a lot of exciting things going on here. I think there's going to be a Survivor tournament as well. That's been a staple of past tournaments for DraftKings. Hopefully they'll have that. We're going to go through game by game here, the tried and true method, the only way to do it here as we go. One thing that we've introduced to the show is having the projections show up on the screen there as we're talking about it. So haven't done that with 2 people yet, so bear with me while I figure out that layout, and then we'll just kind of get into it here. And do our thing, basically breaking it down, talking about any plays that we like. And obviously, at the end, if we have any core betting opportunities, props, anything like that, we'll throw that out there. Shout out to you. You have been huge, an integral part of Monmouth, the home winning streak that they rattled off. They did lose a game recently to end that, but they got back on the track there, and that has been the generational wealth opportunity. I'm actually mad I wasn't betting that one earlier, but you have a lot of great insight there. If people don't know, you know just as much on the college basketball front as anyone here at FTN. So let's get into it. Let's dive right in. We're going to start with this first game here, which is Maryland versus Penn State. Have a total of 154.5. Maryland is a 5-point favorite. That one's been fluctuating since it dropped between 4.5 and 5. It is at Penn State. And this is a great spot here for the Maryland Terps. While I pull up this, why don't you start us off and give us any plays that you might be feeling right now?
Yeah, I mean, Reese stands out to me, of course, at 8.8. It's a bit of a price decrease from where he's been. And typically when I look at Maryland, I just want to play the cheaper big. I know they've been fluctuating between big games between Queen and Reese. Reese actually coming off a bad game, I believe, too, which typically interests me. I like that yo-yo effect of targeting a guy after a bad game, maybe fading him after a big game. So Reese with under 9K, I can't really remember the last time he's been under 9K. Perhaps it was before I started playing back in November or December, but that was pretty much the number one thing that stood out to me. The rest of the Maryland guys are similarly priced to what we expect. Miguel's in like the mid 5s. Rice is in the high 6s. Gillespie's at 9.2, but yeah, Reese is pretty much the number one that sticks out. And since it's such a big slate with so many games, I think we could be more picky with them this time around.
Yeah, absolutely. Implied there has it Maryland at almost 80 points. Good call out. I like that. You know, we get so involved in numbers and projections and stuff, but like, you know, from playing sports, there is a mental aspect there, and we all have these little superstitions and everything else, and that is something that we see a lot. Like a guy coming off of a big game, everybody jumps to him. Oh, he got rug pulled. He's terrible. And then a guy who had a terrible game before, everybody jumps off. Sure enough, he goes nuts. Corey Washington of Wichita State was a prime example. He gave us like 7 the other night, and then he goes for like 50 last night. Just comical how that happened. So I definitely like the rescall at 8.8. Just a huge price dump. He was 10K just last slate. I mean, he had a rough game, but they don't usually drop prices that steeply. And you can see on the projection screen there that it was a lot easier than I thought it would be. Up at the top there, he does project the best, just at 4.3x, right around 33 minutes. So as long as he avoids any sort of foul trouble here, obviously they have Yannick Conan Niederhauser on the other side, but he's going to have to deal with Eric Queen. I think Reese is going to have a lot of damage. He's going to rebound quite well. We have him projected at almost 11 rebounds, 17 points. So a big game in store for him potentially. So definitely on board with that. And he makes sense as a second pay up. I think first pay up, Janai Broom, everybody's going to be on him. We'll talk about that in a second. You're going to want to be able to find a second pay up there because there is a lot of value on this slate. And I think Reese makes a lot of sense, and he may not be that owned as he probably should be. And Penn State has been a fantasy friendly unit. Coach Mike Rhodes is a reputational coach of being a hard-nosed, defensive minded, but they just haven't been that way this year. And maybe he doesn't have the personnel that he needs, but certainly not a team that we are afraid of. As far as the rest of Maryland goes, you called it out. You know, Selton Miguel has had his time. Rodney Rice has been exceptionally good. Like, so good that it hasn't caught up yet. He's been pretty mediocre for the majority of the season, but the last maybe 3 or 4 games, he's been one of the best guards on the team, and because of that, his projection hasn't quite caught up. So he's definitely an interesting look at 6'9". I think if this were a smaller slate, be much more interested in him. He's kind of a posh play S type of guy, but I'm not going to end up using him here, but I do think he does a good game against Penn State. And then you've got guys like Jacoby Gillespie who are fine. Obviously Derek Queen. It's interesting to see when you look at the how highly priced everyone is. Queen at 10K, Ace Baldwin there at 9.8, 9.2 for Gillespie, and then Reese at 8.8. So the fourth in line there. Usually he's the top priced or one of the top 2 priced in there. So it just kind of shows you how, you know, value he is. And then we have Freddie Dion, who is priced at just 4.5. He ended up having a pretty nice game. He's gotten himself back into the starting lineup, which is solid. Puff Johnson's not going to be back anytime soon, it doesn't sound like. 34 minutes against Indiana, 10 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists. It wasn't a huge game, but at his price point of 4.7 at 19.5 was fine. They drop him 200 more, not really sure why, but he's probably going to put up 20 with ease there. So a solid value piece that you can use in single entry, main lineups, cash games. probably not the most large field play there or the Q to get you, a high ceiling, but you look at it, 3 straight games over 30 minutes, and he's taken at least 8 shots in those 3 games as well. He doesn't always give us peripheral stats, but he does shoot a ton, and has taken on that kind of third option in the pecking order there, and has really pushed DeMarco Dunn back to the sidelines, and Nick Kieran, who lost his starting spot with Dion back. Now they played Kieran almost 30 minutes, and Dunn played mid-20. So I think Dunn's going to end up being on the outside looking in here. So Dion at 4-5 and Julian Reese at 8-8. I think both are very in play, as you mentioned, everyone else being kind of more of a GPP look. But I do have some interest in Rodney Rice just as a heat check here, because this game does have the look of a higher scoring one. All right, moving on, we have Miami versus North Carolina, and this will be right in Adam's wheelhouse. He is not started off as a North Carolina fan, but his significant other is, so naturally he knows all about this team. So we'll get into that in a second. This is a total of 161.5, one of the highest on the slate. UNC an 18.5 point favorite. Miami, they are just absolutely getting dumpstered by every single program. Larinaga is gone, and it's just going to be a total reset here. But we have some looks on both sides that we can get to. Miami especially, we know with Matthew Cleveland, who's questionable. I think Matthew Cleveland's going to be shut down for the remainder of these games. We'll see if I'm right or not. We have some real cheap value here, guys who are going to play 30-plus minutes, under 5K, under 6K. And then on the North Carolina side, obviously, hey, they're playing Miami. They should absolutely nuke. But how will this game get out of hand so fast, if it will at all? The fact that Seth Trimble and Ian Jackson are coming off the bench, the rotation is suddenly super deep. It makes me a little bit leery on this North Carolina team suddenly. So I'll pull up their projections here, but give me some insight on the North Carolina Miami game, because this is a team you're very familiar with, and you've been making some good call outs on Jalen Withers and some other guys. So how do you see this one?
It really depends on the game flow. If it gets out of hand quickly, I mean, we saw the game the other day, Duke and Miami. That one got out of hand quickly. The starters didn't play full complement of minutes, and I'm assuming most of them didn't hit value because of that. So it really comes down to, if you want to play this game, especially from the North Carolina side, you're going to want to kind of take a stand on the point spread. If you think this is going to be a 20-point game at halftime and North Carolina kind of shuts it down, then I don't see a way you could play RJ Davis at 8-9, Seth Trimble at 7K, even Elliot Cadeau, who's very inconsistent to begin with, at 6-7. I'm kind of upset that Withers is now up to 6K. He was a player we were targeting pretty much daily when he was, 3.9, mid 4s, but at 6K, that's a little steep for me. I'm not even sure if he's blowout proof. It's possible he could be, just because he has kind of entered the rotation a little more heavily recently, but I was more interested in the value guys. Just, I was going to take a stand and assume that this game could blow out. So Jalen Washington stood out for me at 3-7. I think it's possible he could get some garbage time minutes. Ian Jackson at 4-8. I mean, that has to be the lowest we've seen him in a long time as well. And we know how hot he can get from the field. If he just plays enough minutes, I mean, he could score 20 real out there against Miami. So Jackson at 4-8 is probably the best guy I'm targeting. And then even if you really, really, really want to dumpster dive, if you think this game blows out like to smithereens, Cade Tyson at 3-2. He's shown signs of life lately. He's not getting many minutes and pretty much just stands in the corner and shoots threes. But I mean, if you're really dumpster diving, you could go there. The Miami guys, I might have to leave up to you. I mean, I've not really seen Miami extensively this year. I know there's some value plays. It seems like you're going to want to go in the Bethea range, but I'll kind of let you break that one down since I'm more familiar with North Carolina.
Yeah, the Cade Tyson call out. I haven't never mentioned this before. I see Brett in the chat, but they were probably hoping he was like, God, what's his name? They're hoping he was like Dalton Connect. I know I've never talked about that before, but yeah, it hasn't quite worked out. But yeah, man, Withers, God, I got to give it to you. You and Brett lately have been nailing some values in our FTN Discord, and I've been telling these guys every night that we're on air. It's, we have such a knowledgeable group of people there. It's not just me, dropping plays. You guys are dialed in as well, especially on specific teams. And the Withers call, like, I never really fully bought into it myself because, Lubin and Washington, those guys are kind of rotating. But man, he has really played well, and it seems like he's been turned loose by Hubert Davis to a degree. So yeah, it's crazy to see he's 6K. don't think I could pull that trigger on him, but maybe like a heat check in GBPs or the qualifier perhaps, because he's been so good. I did see the Jackson price at 4.8 there. Not starting, so it's a little bit difficult, but mid 20s minutes against Miami, that's definitely got to put him on GPP radar. As far as Miami goes, without Matthew Cleveland, if he doesn't play, this is probably the starter designation we can expect. Divine Ukachukwu, who we have used in the past, Jaleel Bethia, Lynn Kidd, AJ Staten McRae, and Brandon Johnson. Staten McRae has been the starter whenever Cleveland's been out, and then they've used Austin Schwartz and Paul Dishabet off the bench. So we're looking at a 7-8 man rotation, starting with the obvious Lynn Kidd. He's not obvious and like he's a plug and play, but the DBP spot says Lynn Kidd should be able to do well. He's priced at 7.5. I would expect basically no ownership on him whatsoever, but he has put up 30+ DK points in 3 of his last 4. The Duke game, which obviously turned into a blowout, he had 17 and 3, which wasn't bad at all. 14 shot attempts, didn't do much else, and played about 29 minutes. Assuming there's no foul trouble here for him, I would expect him to play somewhere in the realm of 33, 34. And when you look at it, he doesn't project as well as you would think, right around 3.8x, but at that price puts him about 28, 29 fantasy points. I do think he can get more than that, though. That's one of those ones where I'll probably do some modifying just because I think he's going to grab a bunch of rebounds. We have him right around 8 rebounds. I think he could have a double-double here. How much over 4x could he get? Remains to be seen. Would have been a lot more excited about him if he was like 6K or 6.5, but he's the one that would take advantage, especially if Cleveland can't go. As far as the others, Jaleel Bethia, who you called out, he's definitely the value I think that we're going to see a lot of ownership on. He's priced just at 4.1K. He is a freshman, top 10 freshman at that coming into the season. So he's gone through his freshman wall already, and he's had a ton of ups and downs. He has scored 15 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 5. But the lows are very low. We're talking like 1-2 fantasy points in 30 minutes. That's a real possibility. However, his highs are very solid. He's put up almost 40 against Syracuse. He hit a bunch of threes and was right at 36 in about 32 minutes. So expect him to play 30+ minutes here against North Carolina and get a ton of shots up. He took 14 there against Duke. A lot of those were in the second half. So he's going to be the one I think we see most people on. If you can get up to 4 or 5 and play Divine Ukachukwu, he's a little more controlled, younger player as well, but he's been in that kind of starting range more and hasn't got the quick hook. He did have some injuries earlier in this year, but Bethia, we've seen him start, get pulled, not come back in. We've seen it with Staten McRae. We've seen it with Jalen Blackman, who's no longer playing. Divine hasn't really had that happen, and he's been very solid as well. Put up over 24 against Duke, and he's been pretty solid. So as far as a pivot goes, I do think Ukachukwu makes a lot of sense. I'll be interested to see if people are going to play multiple Miami values. But the way that I look at it and see it right now, I think Bethia is your chalk play, and Divine is the one to kind of slide over and pivot a bit. But you can play both. Divine doesn't take the shots that Bethia does, but he contributes a lot more in those peripherals. If you could combine them into one player, they would be absolutely a lock button. But one of those two definitely going to go into your main lineup. Further GBP pivots, you have Schwartz and Nishabet, 4K and 3.5. They're both going to have to play major minutes. Like I said, I would be very surprised if Matthew Cleveland didn't go. I thought he would play last game against Duke. It sounded like there was a good chance that he could with that leg injury. He was even trying to practice some, and then they decided not to. So for me, I feel like it's a shut him down for the rest of the season and just let him go or whatever they're going to do. I think he's out of eligibility anyways. So we can proceed further with the way it looks right now. And I have him projected out at the moment, which means Staten McRae will start and play around 26, 27 minutes. Not really a play here, but you can see the top 4. And then Brandon Johnson, who at sub 5.5, playing around 27, 28 minutes, he's also going to project pretty well. And that's the other one that I think people are going to end up overlooking because they're going to get all this Miami value. Johnson is a guy capable, saw it during his days at ECU, of putting up 40s. There is a bit of a DBP spot for him as well. He can rebound at a high level for the most part, not as good as Glenn Kidd on a consistency basis, but he's definitely capable of pulling down double-digit rebounds here, and anything he can give us over 8 to 9 real points. So he's only 5'3", not as if he's priced out, and it's a forward, which this year forwards have been pretty valuable. And if he reaches that 30, 32-minute mark, he could definitely end up on the optimal. So at about a fraction of the ownership of what I expect for Jaleel Bethia. So definitely some interest here in Miami for a team that, probably going to lose by 20+. You can mini stack them, but be careful because we've been in these spots with teams who are projected to get dog walked. It's really tough when you end up playing 2 or 3 from a team like this, like DePaul. Remember, we've been there before. They end up scoring very low. You got a guy playing 30 minutes doing cardio. It can be a really big downer very quickly, especially early in the slate. So definitely be careful here. But on paper, in a perfect world, 2 or 3 Miami would be fine. I think 2 might end up in the optimal, but proceed with caution for sure. And then you see Ian Jackson up there in the kind of the 4th spot of top value in the current projections, and that's at 24 minutes only. Anything over that, he's probably a slate breaking optimal play as well. It'd be nice if he just started. I think a lot of people would be too sleepy to realize that, and then you'd be a slam, but probably not going to happen. All right. Yeah, you're welcome, Brett. Alex says he's got to mail you something red ASAP. He's the Wolf. We're resident NC State Wolfpack fans. So, all right, moving on to the next game, we have Clemson versus Virginia. This is a total of 132.5. Clemson is a 6.5 point favorite. Pull this up here. Virginia, it's not necessarily the Virginia of yesteryear where, we got to actively avoid them. They're so slow. Like, they've been involved in some pretty fantasy-friendly games, and believe it or not, they scored over 80 in their last game against Wake Forest, which was a death blow game for our guy, Coach Forbes, who just can't seem to get over the hump with Wake Forest. But yeah, 83-75, a offensive explosion, as it were, for Virginia, which we don't normally see. Isaac McNeely with 27 real, 14 for Day Ames, 13 for Andrew Rohde, and then Jacob Kofi, the Washington State Mr. Basketball from last year, also had 12 points off the bench as he goes through it. This is an interesting game. I think a lot of people are still hardwired in their brain to avoid Virginia. Not necessarily the way you want to go. I do think Elijah Saunders for Virginia makes the most sense at 4.2K. Has been in and out of the starting lineup lately after he missed some games. It is a tough front court with Clemson, Ian Schiffelin, Victor Lakin. Like, there's foul trouble written all over there. His rebounding upside could suffer. But overall at 4.2, if he gets the minutes that I would expect, you see he projects at almost 4.5x. He's definitely the value piece that we want to get to here. Jacob Coffey's also interesting at 4K. Maybe a GPP pivot there. We know the deal with Kofi. He is so difficult to get behind. He gets into foul trouble all the time. He's a very young player. He's going to have a lot of over the summer development to go through. I don't even know if he'll stay with Virginia, but his foul rate is mega high. So even at 4K against that Clemson front court, probably not touching him. Dylan Hunter remains a very workmanlike sub 5K option. Not a lot of upside there, but he gets the job done with that 16 to 20 usual fantasy floor. So he's okay. We know the deal on Victor Lakin. If he doesn't foul, he can put up a huge number. Ian Schiffelin, same thing. He just had a pretty nice game last time out. And then Chase Hunter projects pretty well at a meager 7.2K. He's had several down games here lately. He's kind of, I hate to say it, but he's due for a big one. This could be the spot at a 2% ownership, 7.2K price point. But overall, this is a game that I'm not going to get too heavily involved with. We also have Day Ames, who's been pretty good to us, still only priced at 5.1. And then injury designations here. Anthony Robinson missed last game. Sounds semi-doubtful to play in this one for Virginia. And if he doesn't go, that's just more minutes that are going to go over to Elijah Saunders and Blake Buchanan to a degree, who is steadily losing time still, even without Robinson in the last game, while Saunders and Kofi seem to be going up. So if playing anyone, I think we go with the cheapie Elijah Saunders here, but it's far from a lock button play, regardless of what the projections may say. But we'll see how we feel once we start building some lineups. Do you have anything in this game you want to add, or anyone you might be looking at?
Not really. I mean, I wrote down Saunders as well, just in my notes as a value. It seems like there's a lot of guys in his price range that I was writing down. I like a lot of guys in like the 4.2, 4.6 range, and I'm sure we'll get to a bunch of them later. I guess the one shout out for GPPs, Jaden Zachary. Every once in a while, he'll just break a slate. I think I was looking at his game logs. He had a 40-something, 50 points the other day. Let me see if I could pull that up. But he's kind of been alternating some massive performances. He's somebody I like plugging in GPPs. I'm not suggesting to play him. I kind of agree with you. Chase Hunter seems more like a safe option that's due for a big game, but Zachary, he never really gains any ownership or draws as much ownership as the other guy. So he's at least a GPP option that I wrote down, just because every once in a while he just goes for a 50 burger out of nowhere.
Yeah, he almost does it quietly too, because he's at 2 of his last 4, he's been over 40, and you never hear anybody talk about him. And he, like, when he does that, it doesn't hurt you because he's never owned, right? So it's like it doesn't cost you anything. But yeah, if you land on one of those games at 1%, putting up a 50, he did that against SMU on the road, and that was with a really sickening stat line: 19, 6, and 7 with 5 steals. Fully capable of doing that against a team like Virginia here. We'll see if there's enough possessions, but yeah, I like that call out for sure. And I think that all the Clemson guys are somewhat interesting. Even last slate, Dylan Hunter, who he did make it 4x, but it wasn't great. But even at his price point of 4.4, then against Notre Dame, he was like 13% owned. So people just aren't looking towards Clemson. And I think the reputation still for Virginia is to avoid. So this is an interesting game here to at least gain some leverage, especially with Virginia coming off a game in which they just scored 83. Shows they're capable of scoring points now. All right, moving on to the next game, we have UConn versus Providence, total of 145.5. UConn is a 6.5 point favorite. Off top, the highest projection is our guy, Terrace Reed. Take a moment here. We were pretty much the entire industry was on Alex Caravan last slate. And I mean, he was 6'7" in a matchup with Georgetown, just made all of the sense in the world. Obviously, he bricked out. Now he's 7'3", whatever. We'll get your take on him in a minute. But kept saying, like, man, no Thomas Sorber. The interior is going to be ripe. Like, Samson Johnson's going to do his thing with fouls, getting, on the bench with foul trouble. He did. Terrace Reed's going to come in there. Man, he's just going to have such a huge game. But how could I possibly play him because of all the foul trouble he has? And then ended up not playing him and watched him absolutely go nuts, putting up a 40. And I had to complain in the Discord all night because I just kept kicking myself that he put up 20 and 10 with ease against Georgetown. Unfortunately, Georgetown, their last 3 games are against like subpar front court, so I don't know that we'll be able to take advantage like that. But here we are once again with Reed at 6.6K, coming off a huge game. We'll have no ownership, and it's the same story with him every single slate. If he can stay on the floor and play 25 plus minutes, he's a slate breaker. Like, there's no question if the minutes are there, he's going to put up a big number. The question is, can he avoid foul trouble and actually stay on the floor? That's where it really has been frustrating with Terrace Reed, especially when his price starts to creep up like this, because he has followed up some big performances with some truly heinous floor games. Last time against Providence, it was a close 87-84 win at home. They're on the road this time. In 18 minutes, he put up almost 26. So this interior of Providence is going to have their work cut out for them. Christ Ndoko, Oswin Ernwusi, we like both of those guys for their size, their girth. They take up space, but they are not athletically inclined like Terrace Reed is. If he can stay out of foul trouble, I think he's going to have his way with these guys. Definitely less comfortable with him now than I was last slate and didn't even use him. And coming off of a big game, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. So still going to be low on Terrace Reed here. But yeah, GPP-wise, if you're playing any alts, you got to have him in something because he is just incredible when he plays those minutes. I do find the price of Samson Johnson interesting at only 3.8K. It continues to dump. Why? Because he keeps getting into that early foul trouble. He doesn't offer a lot. He doesn't shoot. The offense is built around him. If he's not grabbing rebounds and blocking shots, he's just not getting there. People will look at the 3.8 and think, man, this is an auto lock for a player who's starting at the 5 for UConn. But think of it as, yes, he's starting, but it's a direct split with Terrace Reed. And if he gets into foul trouble, it's going to be trouble. If Terrace Reed gets into foul trouble, then perhaps Samson's going to do well. And you can see here on the sheet at 18 minutes at that price, because of Samson's rates as a shot blocker and a rebounder, he does project quite well, upwards of almost 16 fantasy points. But for me to sit here and say for sure he's going to put that up, I'm not exactly certain there. But he does allow us a lot of lineup flexibility. And if he just gives us 10 even with the payups that are available to us this time with our guy Janai Broom, it should be okay. But when you look at the Arkansas values and some of the others we're going to talk about, he definitely pales in comparison to them. But it just goes to show we have a ton of value on this slate. We're 4 or 5 games in, and we've talked about a sub 5K guy in each and every one of those games, which means we're probably looking at a high scoring slate, which isn't actually our favorite. We tend to do better on the lower scoring slates. At least I do. So I'm a little bit nervous about how this one might go. But what do you like here? Providence, man, Providence has been a team I think that makes you tilt more than anything. There's some teams that have made you tilt, but I think Providence is one that has gotten you to some frustrated levels. They're deep now. They got guys healthy. Wesley Cardette's back and playing. Corey Floyd's back and playing. Tough spot against UConn. What are you doing with this one?
I loved stacking Providence maybe a month ago, maybe a couple of weeks ago. I think the theme of this game on both sides is I just liked a lot of these guys a couple of weeks ago and their prices were lower. And even just UConn, looking at DR, I was 4K, I think, a couple of games ago. Now he's back up in the 6K range. All the Providence guys, obviously, with the injuries that they had, it was easy to stack them because they only had seemingly 7 healthy bodies at one point. But with Floyd back, Cardette back, I don't really like anybody on Providence. I just don't have that much interest, and it stinks because I did love stacking them. They did pay off one time. There was a 5-man stack when they were really hurting. But I don't really see anything major. You might have convinced me a little bit with Terrace Reed. See, I was going to automatically hop off because kind of what I was talking about before with the yo-yo effect. Fade the guy after a big game, target the Caravans after a bit of a dud. But I don't really think Providence has anybody down low that's a foul drawer. Like, they got some big guys. They got some athletic specimens down there, but they're not really going to put Reed in a position where he's going to foul as much. And I know I'm saying that now. He could still get in foul trouble. But I don't see them, throwing the ball down low every possession and putting Terrace Reed in a position to rack up 2 or 3 fouls. So you might have convinced me a little bit there. I don't like the price increase, but definitely in alt builds, like you said. And then Providence, I'm mostly avoiding. We can't get Mila at a cheap price anymore when he was putting up near triple doubles when they were really down. But so it's pretty much Reed and alt builds. I am at least interested in Caravan, coming off a bit of a bad game. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah. And with Cardette back and these other guys now, Justin Fernandez is back to irrelevant. He was having some pretty big games there. But Caravan is going to go from being 72% owned last UConn slate to now probably like 5. So it's pretty interesting because what's going to happen. Nobody's going to be on him. He's going to get hot. He's going to block a bunch of shots inexplicably like he did earlier in the season. And suddenly he's going to have 40 by like the under 16 of the second half. It's like, oh, why didn't we use him? So that happens so frequently. It's crazy. I was talking to Brett about this earlier. I'm going to start tracking it. Like, of all the years I've been playing, I've never really tracked that. I think next year that's something I want to track just to see because it feels like it happens a whole hell of a lot. All right, let's move on here to Butler versus Villanova. Definitely another game that I think a lot of people will just kind of gloss over, but it has some fantasy viability. Total of 145.5. Nova a 6.5 point favorite. It's not as if either of these teams is particularly exciting. Butler does give a major pace boost to Villanova, and we have seen Butler games turn into frequently fantasy-friendly affairs. And Villanova, as awful as they were at the beginning of the year, betting against them anytime they were small favorites, just betting the opposite regardless who they played, was such a profitable move. Suddenly Villanova is respectable. They're winning games, and they're looking like they might be a tough out in the conference tournament. An interesting game here against Butler, and the rotation for Villanova it was already pretty small, but it's shrunken down even further. They were using some of their younger guys throughout the season and kind of stretching themselves into maybe a 9-man rotation. Now we've seen them drop down to about a 6, maybe 7-man rotation, which basically means Jameer Brickus, Wooga Poplar, Jordan Longino, Eric Dixon getting all the minutes they can handle, Tyler Perkins playing a ton off the bench, and then we've seen Jordan Dumont, the freshman, and Chris Perkins, who's no longer in the rotation, giving water breaks. So there's a lot to like here because of the Butler defense being pretty suspect. And some guys you're going to see on this list that project better than I think they will. And I always try to make sure to say that to people, especially in our Discord, like, hey, this guy's projecting pretty well, but let's be a little bit careful. One of those players being Jameer Brickus, called it out several times when he has projected higher than I thought he should. This is one of those games where I actually think his projection is correct, sitting there at 5,300, playing over 30 minutes most of the time. He'll lose some minutes to Tyler Perkins from here and there. Not much of a scoring, consistent scorer. He plays a lot of empty minutes, but I do think this is a game where he can crawl over that 4x mark and possibly put up even more if the minutes are true. Jordan Longino at 5'2". He's one that has to shoot to get there. You see, he projects extremely well. They're expect the system in the DVP thinks he's going to get a lot of shots up. Maybe he will. I would prefer Brickus over Jordan Longino for what it's worth, but I don't know that either is going to make my main lineup because both of them are just kind of plays that have been cheap for a while and don't necessarily end up on the optimal. And I rarely feel myself saying, why didn't I play Jameer Brickus? But they're cheap. Tyler Perkins as well at 4'2". I actually would almost prefer him, especially when he was starting earlier this season. Our guy Wooga Poplar's priced out at 9-1. It is senior day for Nova, who I know with the transfer portal and everything else, like senior day doesn't mean as much as it used to. But there are 3 players who are being honored here. Bokai, Longino, and Wooga Poplar. So I don't want to exactly write off our guy because I think emotionally there'll be some stuff here for Wooga, but he's only been at Nova there for a short time. Being priced only $400 cheaper than Eric Dixon is crazy. He's given us some big games, though. I have nothing negative to say about him, but I don't know that I'll get there to him. But it would not surprise me if he put up a big game. This is an interesting spot for Eric Dixon as well against Butler. We're searching for a second pay up. I'm saying that because to me, Jani Broom is the obvious pay up. He projects extremely well. When you see it on the screen, you'll be like, well, we have this thing where every time someone's 10x or 10K or more and they project well over 4x, we got to kind of just plug them in. Broom is that guy, but we can fit in a second one, possibly even a third one with all his value. And I think Dixon is certainly a candidate for that. He hasn't been a big time producer in the mid part of the Big East schedule. He's been a lot of 29 to 33s, and we just haven't heard from him much. He hasn't been rostered much, and he hasn't hurt us. But he did drop a 50 on a very bad Seton Hall team, and he has rattled off 30 plus fantasy points in 3 straight, and those are against the likes of UConn and Marquette in addition to Seton Hall. So some tougher opponents here. This is an easier matchup for him against Butler, and I do like his chances of putting up a big game and perhaps even a double-double. So Dixon is definitely in play for me. I don't think I've rostered Eric Dixon since November, but he's very much in play here against Butler. As for anybody else, Bokai is all the way down at 3.6. You just have these speculative values that you can plug in there. He is capable, but I don't like the matchup for him individually. There'll be times that Andre Screen is out there on him, and that matchup just screams foul trouble for me. So I'm not going to be too involved with him, but that's a very cheap price for a starter in a matchup that there's going to be plenty of fantasy goodness here, I think, that might surprise some people. Jamil Telford and Pierre Brooks are both expensive. Brooks was huge for us. Just kind of the rule for him. Anytime he's under 7K, I'm pretty interested, and especially when it's a matchup like when he faced DePaul. But over 7K, I don't feel that interested in him. I don't usually play Pierre Brooks. It's been just that one time this year, and it was the DePaul game. So I'm not going to be going back to him here against Villanova. Villanova's defense has taken a step forward here and kind of finding that they're not the most targetable team right now. We do have some interesting value in Patrick McCaffrey. I did like triple take when I saw his price was 4.4 because he's been like a 6-7K guy for a lot of the season and the past week, maybe around 5.5. But now he's 4.4, absolutely in play. I don't know that I'm going to get there necessarily because, again, we have all this value available to us. But you see there, we have 8, 9 guys at 3.8 or higher projection. McCaffrey's right up there over 4X, plays 28 to 29, 30 minutes. I mean, hit a couple threes, get some rebounds perhaps. He's going to be close to making value. Yes, it's Villanova, but there's just a ton of minutes to be had there for McCaffrey. They don't really have that deep of a rotation. Granted, they've had some injuries, some ineffectiveness of their bench, but he should play a large amount of minutes. So I don't want to write him off either. He's really not that interesting. He can play 30 minutes and put up a 6. So it doesn't necessarily matter that he's going to be on the floor, but it is an interesting call out at 4.4. And again, we haven't been through a single game that we haven't been able to peg a sub 5K guy, in any. So there's just way too much value on this slate, which kind of makes me nervous with what the scores are going to be. But there'll be the inevitable landmines here as well. Villanova is a team that, with Poplar, I know you've had some success. You like to talk your trash about Eric Dixon. Is there anybody in this game that you're feeling an affinity towards or looking like they might be somebody that's a lineup staple for you, perhaps, or any exposure at all?
Definitely not dying to play anybody here. You got to give me a reason to play Eric Dixon. I think I've rostered him one time, and it was in cash. He's definitely a more of a cash play. I mean, he doesn't if you look at his game logs and just watch him, he almost always gets you enough points where you're not going to walk away and just throw your laptop out the window. Like you're going to have a chance if you play Eric Dixon. I'm not going to play him in GPPs. I've never played him in GPPs this year. I'm mostly just avoiding this game. I mean, we talked about it pretty much every game, like you said. There's the Perkins 4-2, McCaffrey at 4-4. Like those, there's just so many plays in that price range that I like that I'm not sure I'm going to force these guys in. They're certainly viable. I don't want to pay over 9K for Wooga as much as I like him and as much as he's done well for us in the past. So again, I'm just not, there's nobody here that I'm crossing off the list entirely, but I'm not going to try to force these guys in when we have 10 games. And there's going to be so many other players in that 4K range that we can target instead of these guys. But I mean, certainly some viable plays, but I think you laid it out pretty well. I don't really have anybody else. I mean, Colby King's really cheap, but I don't trust him either. He's just not somebody that I feel the need to get to, even though he could hit value and he's very cheap. But other than that, I think you pretty much said it all.
That's the thing with these values. Like we've had a sub 5K guy, at least one in each game, but a lot of them, like Perkins, he could put up 20 and absolutely wreck it here, but he's played 30-minute games where he's only gotten 3. So there's just going to be a big, the victors on this slate are going to be the ones that, yes, they hit on their values, but they avoided those ones that are just absolutely detonating in the bad way, right? Like they put it up that single digit. And when you're dealing with all these cheap guys, they tend to be cheap for a reason. Now in November, when pricing is wrong and DK and FanDuel don't know who's who, and you've got these really cheap studs for 5K, that's different. But we're at a point in the season now where if a guy's super cheap, it's probably for a reason, and it's important to kind of recognize that. So there's a lot of volatility with the values in this game alone. So I want to be clear about that. This is a slate that's very good for those that are building those max lineups, 20 plus. I don't know if they're doing the mini max right now, but anything that allows you to enter 50 plus lineups, this is a great slate for that for sure. All right, moving on to a more exciting game, one that'll surely be popular. Auburn versus Kentucky. It's a total of 166.5 right now. Auburn is a 4.5 point favorite. The Kentucky side, Jackson Robinson is going to be out. He did return, dealing with the wrist injury against Oklahoma, but he did have a setback, so he was unable to play much, and he will not play here at all. Lamont Butler did return as well. They did cap his minutes. They kept him at about 20, and word is they're going to give him a few more for this one, but I don't know what a few actually means. Some coaches that could mean 5. Some that could mean 2, and some that could mean playing the entire game. We just don't. Some of these coaches, we just don't know. He's an interesting look at 6'3". He only played those 20 minutes against Oklahoma, but put up well over a fantasy point per minute. Butler has been honestly one of the best players on Kentucky when healthy. So I have interest there if he were fully healthy and good to go, even against a team like Auburn, who has been easily the top 2 or 3 team in the country this season. With Robinson out, makes Kobe Brea at least interesting because of his minutes. But I'm not usually targeting against Auburn all that much. Otega Awe has been great. He had a huge game last time out against Oklahoma, hard carried, but he's at 8.7. Amari Williams there at 8.4. I feel like he's going to be just getting into major foul trouble here. Our guy Andrew Carr, who has been starting the last few games, but he got into foul trouble last time out, even at 4.7, unless he's going to stay out of foul trouble and play close to 30 minutes. We don't really need him either. It's mostly about the Auburn side here. And I will leave that side to you because I'm sure you wrote down some values. There's a lot of cheapies here on Auburn. And I think whoever picks the right one from the Tapad Pettiford, Denver Jones, like that group there is really going to be a step above the rest. And a 2-man Auburn stack seems almost inevitable for the optimal. Janai Broom is there at 11K. Let me switch over the teams here. And it's not been a hard roll, but I know you're on board with it, and you're one that kind of brought this up. It was the Yaxel Lendenberg game, not this past one, but 2 UAB slates ago, where it was like, he ended up being chalk like always, but he projected like super crazy at 10.5. He was like damn near 5X. It's like, how could we ever fade a guy who projects that well? Yes, he's expensive, but if he's putting up 50 plus, like, how do we get away from him? We just have to find a way to roster him. And Janai Broom is that guy for me on this slate. And he's had a couple of down games for sure, but down games for him are still 40. And you can see 11K here. I have him at 32.5 minutes roughly. Nearly, that's basically 50 fantasy points at 4.5x. So that's just got to be close to an auto play there in single entry, high dollar cash games, and even in large field. Like having those points is just so amazing. And especially with all this value that we have available. And if it's a game where he puts up a 60 plus like he did just recently, this Kentucky matchup, man, this could be a 100 to 90 type of game. We know that Kentucky is going to give up 100 to Auburn. Like, that's a guarantee. And Broom is going to have his fingers on a lot of those 100 points, regardless from he scores them, gets assists, block shots, all of that. So it's really hard to not roster him. And I expect even on a 10-game slate that we see probably above 50% ownership of him, which makes me sick. I hate that on large slates, but even I have to say Janai Broom is really, really difficult to fade here. Justifiably, if you're making multiple lineups, you can fade him. And if it's a down game for him, like we just saw, from some other pay-ups here, Yaxel actually last UAB slate, Yaxel went a little under. So you could have faded him at 90% and done really well. So you want to have that in your back pocket. But if you're only a one lineup person, Janai Broom, I think, has to be the one you start with. And I think most of the industry will feel that way. Now it's that second piece of Auburn that you need to get right to really kind of set yourself apart from the rest of the field. So leading into that, who are you looking at there as other Auburn options? And are you as high on Broom as me? Because like I said, I kind of gave credit to you when you brought up Yaxel 2 times ago. And it's been stuck with me ever since. Like, you know what? If a guy projects this well at 10, 11K, probably have to just plug him in and figure out the rest later.
Yeah, you pretty much said it. If you look, usually when you see a player priced at 11K on the sheet, that you almost have to scroll down to find them because they're going to put up raw points, but they don't project as well. But when I look at your sheet and I see 11K player still near the top, I'm almost automatically going to play it because at that point you have the combination of value plus raw points together. So you almost have multiple avenues of success. You mentioned down game for Broom is still usually close to 40 points. Against Kentucky, you said it as well. I can't envision them scoring anything below 90, 80 points. Like they're going to push 100. So, and Broom obviously is just the leader of that team. So I don't have any problems locking him in cash. GPPs, you can fade him just for leverage. You mentioned that as well. Pettiford's the second piece that I'm looking at. I don't know his rates, but I know when he's out there, he's extremely active. I'm interested there. His price is, I think it's gone down a little bit. I mean, he hasn't put up that game where he scored 29 or 30 points like he had earlier in the season, but he's still getting it into the high teens. I think there's a chance for an explosion here. He's one of those players that can pop off. So he's the value piece that I'm interested in. I wasn't really looking at Denver Jones. And I did jot down Baker Mazzara in case you want to do a balance Betty type lineup. I like his price point. And he's pretty consistent as well. I'd say he probably will score mid-20s, could push over into the 30s. So those are really the only 3 guys. And I think looking at your sheet, I think those are the 3 guys at the top. So it seems like I'm on the right track. But Pettiford would be the value I'm most interested in to pair with Broom.
Yeah, I like Pettiford. His rates are great, explosive. Like, when they need a second score, if other guys are off or Broom is, kind of struggling, they could look to him. He's one of their few bench pieces that they can use as a go-to scorer. So I'm definitely on board with that. I think Denver Jones will probably see a little bit of an ownership spike. He's just cheap enough at 4.7, but close enough to 5K to where he could really ruin you if he has a down game. He projects pretty well because 18 to 20 fantasy points is usually what he's going to give you, and at 4.7 that makes value. But I do prefer Pettiford as well, just because of the upside. And then Dylan Cardwell is priced all the way down at 4.7. He's probably going to be muscling up with Amari Williams at times. So I do worry about that kind of neutralizing him and them both just ending up fouling each other. But if he doesn't, he's a great GPP look at 4.7 because Cardwell has had some pretty big games. And I don't think most of the industry has even really noticed. I don't think Cardwell gets that owned much. There was a slate a while back when Broom was missing that he was pretty chalky, and simply because Broom was out. But for the most part, we don't see a lot of Cardwell ownership, and he did against Ole Miss, put up like a 40. He had a 35 against your Monmouth boys back in December, I believe it was. There's a lot of upside there for Cardwell. So there's a lot of cheapies on this Auburn side, and Kentucky just gives up so many points. I'd really considered like the Chaney Johnson, Miles Kelly, Chad Baker group. I think Kelly and Johnson can kind of be written off to a degree, which means they'll probably go nuts. But I do like the Baker call at 6'3". He just continues to produce. The whole narrative coming into the tournament, you're already hearing it in the media, like, oh, is he going to be able to keep his head? And he got a technical a few games ago, and people were already lining up the whole, like, he's going to be the detriment. Can he not be a hothead? And whatever, is going on there. But when he's on the floor, man, he is as good as anyone. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that. I think everybody wants to talk about the attitude, but as far as basketball skill goes, yes. And he was outrageously good last time out. And I thought he was going to play less, coming back from missing some time. Still played 30 minutes in a game that they blew out, and he had 22 and 3, basically threw up 35 fantasy points without any real effort watching that game. And just, it was one of those ones where I watched part of it and it's like, oh, he's okay. And then I looked at the box score. I was like, holy shit, when did he do that? Like one of those type of games. So yeah, at 6'3", I think he's way better of a play than people realize. And you always have that guard forward eligibility, modifier there. I like that with players. I can kind of move them around as I want. It is odd because this year I've been finding more forwards than guards. Usually the guard forward thing is better because you need to play a guard in your forward, but that hasn't been the case. But I do really like that call. But big decision there, I think, between Pettiford and Jones. I think most people would go Jones just because starting level but I do like that leverage for Pettiford though. So that'll be a decision for sure. And I think as people play, NBA guys are back in the NBA streets, but there's NFL money still out there, and it's getting close to turning time. We'll have some more casual players or newer players, and I think the tendency there is to just look at totals and then stack those games. So we'll naturally see the ownership spike for Auburn, Kentucky because of a near 170 total. All right, moving on, we have Arkansas versus South Carolina, total of 140.5. This one started as Arkansas -1. It's now South Carolina -1. I only know that because I've been updating the implied totals on the sheet, and I've been keeping up on that, and keeps fluctuating there. So South Carolina is a 1-point favorite here. Definitely a game we're going to want exposure to. Arkansas will be without Adu Tiero once again. Just a real gift that we got on that last Arkansas slate, because we knew coming in that Tiero wasn't going to play. I think what happened, because it was a night slate, they just put in their lineups and just didn't go back to it. The decision we had to wait on was Idu going to start in his place, or was it going to be Brazil? Once it was Brazil, we plugged him in. He put up a huge number. He played 40 minutes. Granted, it was, a pretty wild game, but he put up a absolutely huge score there in those 40 minutes, 27.5 fantasy points. He's priced at 3.7. He was 3.2 then. Now he's 3.7. He was 17% owned on that slate. We pat ourselves on the back here. He'll be way higher owned this time. I mean, the 10-game slate, you'd like to think that nobody will be above 50, but he's probably going to be like 70 plus, simply because he had a big game. He'll be starting, and everybody's going to be talking about him. So expect heavy ownership there. And you probably can just go ahead and plug in Jonas Idu next to him, because his price didn't go up enough either. And that was the one thing. We had a great slate, that last Arkansas slate, so no complaints. But it was the proper thing to do, was to play Idu with Brazil. Both of them put up over 20. Both of them are priced under 4K. We have this myriad of 3 and 4 and sub 5K options that we've talked about in each game. This is the first one where I felt like confidently, and yes, Brazil's been in good spots before. Idu's been in good spots before, and they've totally bricked out. So I shouldn't sit here and say they're lock button plays, but the price, the upside, the matchup, everything just lines up for both of them to be very, very good. Jovanovic Ivicevic is also banged up. It's not even sounding like he's going to play, heavy minute. I mean, he's going to play, but it sounds like he's kind of capped right now as well. Like, we'll probably not see him hit 30. So they're going to give Idu and Brazil all the minutes that they can handle. Same with Kobe Knox, who's priced at a reasonable 5.7, kind of that balanced Betty look that we're just kind of talking about. So there's a lot to like here on the Arkansas side. And I think that's where a lot of the ownership will go, clearly, because they're running about a 7-man rotation at this point. And when I pull this up, you're going to see, obviously, those two are both projected through the moon. We got our one gift of them being low owned. We won't get it again. You see Brazil at 25 minutes only, over 6x. If he's going to play 40, which if I put that in, what's that put him up? 10x. So I mean, he's a pretty strong play, needless to say. Same with I do like Carter Knox quite a bit. I think his ownership will be way down compared to the others because nobody's going to want to play 3 Arkansas. I'm probably not 3 stacking any team on a 10-game slate, although I've done it before. But I do like Knox a lot. He's a nice pivot as well. GPP looks. I do think he has a 40 upside that he can lumber into. His high this season, I think, is about, I have it as 33.5. So he's definitely shown that upside, but a big game brewing there for sure. As far as anybody else on this Arkansas team, it's really just those 3 for me. DJ Wagner, he's fine. Billy Richmond has shown some upside here. John L. Davis woke up there for a minute, but his total season's been so down. You see, he doesn't project well at all. So it's really just the cheapies. South Carolina side, Nick Pringle is another one of those low 4K options that is available to us. If this was a slate where we were hard pressed for value, I think we'd see Nick Pringle hit like a 30-40% ownership mark because he's actually pretty damn good at that price. And in this spot against Arkansas, I do foresee him pulling down a ton of rebounds. We have him projected at almost 6 rebounds, just about 8 points. His 17-18 fantasy point number there at 4.2. But because there's so many other options at that range, just hitting 4x may not be enough. So a secondary value for sure, but on the South Carolina side, Nick Pringle is the most playable to me. As far as pay-ups go, Colin Murray-Boyles, he never really projects all that well, but this is a type of game where I could see him putting up a big number, and he's playing huge minutes. I have him slotted at 32 minutes, but I wouldn't be surprised if he played 37, 38. He's done it before many, many times. So I think he's in line as a GPP pay up as well. Do you have an opinion on Colin Murray-Boyles, and is there a Brazil versus I do for you? Are you playing them both? How do you kind of feel there?
Murray-Boyles is like an alt GPP type guy that I'd be interested in. I don't know if I could get up there when I could pay 8.8 for Reese, like we talked about, but the values are obvious. Going back to last slate, I got a little fancy and tried to play Adu over Brazil, thinking, that maybe Brazil do what he does and he's stupid on the court sometimes and he'll only play 18 minutes somehow, even though he should have had the whole game to himself. But turns out he played 40 minutes, which is absolutely stunning. I don't know if he's ever played 40 minutes, but I mean, if he does, like you said before, he'd go 10x. So I think you just play both. I mean, I wasn't upset playing Adu last slate. He still crushed value. Just Brazil was just 10 times better. So I think the answer could be just to play both. And even if you don't get nuclear games from the two of them, you don't need that much. And now with Thiero out, I think when I had looked earlier, he was still questionable. But if he's confirmed out and Ivisic is banged up, like you said, it's almost impossible not to go with those two guys. And I do like the Pringle call as well. When Pringle was with Alabama, it seemed like if he was just on the court for 15 minutes, he'd score 20 fantasy points. I haven't seen South Carolina as much, so I don't know why he's been a little quieter this year. But he's certainly in that range that we've talked about many times today, that 4.2 to 4.6 range. So he becomes viable as well. I agree with you about DJ Wagner. It's not a bad play, but again, we could be picky on a 10-game slate. Same thing with John L. Davis. He's just he had a couple big games, but he's just really not getting there. And again, he's at that awkward price where we don't really have to go there. I think that's it. Yeah, just play the two Arkansas value, and Murray-Boyles could be an alt play.
Yeah, it was like late January when he fell to that like mid 4K, 5K range. I was like, man, he's not been good this year, but shoot, it's still Nelly. And he's kind of picked himself up from there. He's been decent. But with Pringle, he was kind of an important run or play for Alabama during their tourney runs, but he's just been in a tougher environment with South Carolina because it's obviously less talent around him. His foul rate in the last 10 games has skyrocketed, so that's the main downside for him. But if he can actually stay on the floor for 20, 22 minutes, yeah, he's an interesting look. All right, let's move on to Oklahoma Ole Miss here. Got my man T9. I know it's officially a show when you stop by. Appreciate it. And then Aaron stopping by here. Where's Kendrick? You miss Kendrick Davis. That was your guy. Everybody has their player. We say that messes with them. You fade them, they go off. You use them, they brick. And Kendrick Davis was that guy for Aaron. So, all right, let's pull up the Oklahoma Ole Miss game here. This one is a total of 152.5, pretty high total. 7.5 point spread in favor of Ole Miss. And why don't you start us off here, because Chris Beard's doing his thing with the Rebels. They're in prime position here. Oklahoma's a desperate team that got a big win here recently. And I feel like Ole Miss is a little fragile of a team. So this might be a pretty fun game, actually. There's got to be some fantasy goodness here somewhere. Who do you like?
I want to know what we're doing with Malik Dia. Which version of Malik Dia are we going to get? Because, again, he's just priced in a spot where if he just gets the minutes, he could put up 40 points. He's still hovering in the 6K range. We just never know. It's kind of like what we saw with Mara tonight. You just don't know if he's going to get yanked after 1 or 2 minute stints and then just ride the bench, come back in, and then put up bad shots because he's forcing it. So I don't really know. I haven't seen Ole Miss in several games, so I don't really know if he's trending upward with his minutes or if he's getting out of the doghouse a little bit, but he's always the biggest wild card. Everybody else is just Matthew Morrell, 5'2". I know he's been questionable for like a month straight. You probably could give more insight on whether he's a safe play, but 5'2" for Matthew Morrell. I mean, I'm always going to have interest there at that price. I mean, it's extremely cheap. Jalen Murray as well. He's cheap. It just really matters which Ole Miss cheap player you choose and if you land on the right one, because there's a bunch of them. But Ole Miss is like a carousel team that I cannot figure out. Sean Padula is 7-8. I mean, if you're going to go more of a balanced build, if you fade Broom and just want to build a balanced lineup, I'm not opposed to that. But it really comes down to a guessing game with Ole Miss. I mean, you could make an argument probably to play anybody. It just matters if you land on the right guy and fade the right guy.
Yeah, the Rebels have a really talented roster, like 1 through 7, but they have so many similar players in that they got to have the ball in their hands. And I think that was kind of coming into the season, I wondered how that was going to work, and it hasn't been great. They've made it work because Chris Beard, I mean, throw out the off the court stuff. He's a great coach. They're 19-9. They're in the position for the tournament. They have lost 3 in a row, so they need to stop the bleeding here. They have a murderer's row coming up. They got to get this win against Oklahoma because they have a game against Tennessee on Wednesday. And then next weekend, they finish on the road against Florida. So a very tough end to the season for the Rebels. This is a must-win game for them. Matthew Morrell, yeah, he's been questionable / probable coming into pretty much every single game. He's just got some minor ailments, and they just throw him on the report. SEC commissioner had basically made it seem like he's going to fine people if they weren't on reports, and then he just doesn't check anyway. So it's this weird game they play. But yeah, he's in. He's played 30 minutes against Auburn. He was pretty solid, only 5'2". He's been a guy that I've considered in the low 6K range a few times and just didn't quite get there because there is a lot of cannibalization that happens between these guards. But 5'2" is a price that we have to consider. And you see his rates, he's got a pretty solid usage rate. His shot rate's down from where it was without all these guys previous years. But at the 29, 30-minute mark, with what he does, that puts him well over 4.6x, one of the top projected plays on the slate. So I would expect some ownership there, but maybe not as much as he probably should get because I think people are a little skittish on these guards. You also have Jalen Murray, you mentioned, at 4.8. That's really cheap for him. He's very volatile, though. I would just pay the 400 more to go Morrell. But this is one of those prime situations where it's probably more of a coin flip and you're going to be frustrated one way or another. So be ready for that. Dre Davis has been our kind of preferred, like Malik Dia is our guy, but we've been using Dre Davis a lot because he's been so cheap and he's a little bit more safe with the minutes. He's only 6'1", so I don't mind him either. And then Jamean Breakfield's really cheap right now at 5'5" as well. So there's a lot of different looks here. And Padula, I mean, shoot, at Tech, at 7-8, we'd be locking him in every slate. So, there's upside for him as well, but it's just been a weird fit for him in this rotation. As for Malik Dia, man, we know how good he can be. We had him that day. He gave us that 60. Like, he is solidified himself as a hashtag Walt's guys, FTN guy. But the minutes just get jerked around so much by Beard, and we'll see him play a 3-minute stint, get pulled, play a 2-minute stint, get pulled. Like, I just don't understand it. I've done a ton of research. I've looked at message boards. I've looked for answers on why this happens, and there's just like I just don't know. It's maddening that he doesn't play more. And it's like the same thing you mentioned with Mara today. Yes, he got burned on a pick and roll, and the angry elf Mick Cronin had to bench him for the whole game and let him play the last 4 minutes, and he puts up 7. Like, give me a break with that. Dia, if he's playing 30 plus consistently, would be like a 10K player. There'd be no way to not price him that high. So he's interesting. Yes, at 6'5", probably not getting there just because, like, 20 minutes is really all you can anticipate. If he gets more, there's a shot. Always like Malik Dia. But I think Morel is the way that we want to go here. And it's been a long time since I've rostered Matthew Morel. Like, I almost feel like it's been a year because I don't think with this roster I've rostered anything besides Dia, Dre Davis, and maybe one time Jalen Murray. And I got lucky when he had like 8 steals or something. So I haven't really been on Morel too much. I do worry about him because he has a tendency to go long stretches without doing anything. That's always nerve-wracking for me, but that price is really hard not to look at 5.2K, especially a matchup against a Oklahoma team that typically, Porter Moser is a team or a coach you don't want to target against, but I don't know if he doesn't have the right personnel or what it is, but their defense just has not been a Porter Moser level of defense, and they have been bleeding fantasy points to multiple positions, but especially that second guard there in the 2 spots. So, and when you look at overall rates, Morel's usage and shot rates are down, but he has no problem chucking. He usually has the green light to do so. And he also has an extremely high steal rate, which comes into play here against Oklahoma and their guards, who have turned it over a ton this season. One of the worst marks in the conference. So there's a lot of steal upside here for these guards, Morel and Murray especially. On the Oklahoma side, there is some cheap guards to be had. Jeremiah Fears, he had his freshman wall. He's over it now. If you didn't get him in his like mid 6K range, there's just no way to roster him at 9.3. That's, even if you did, I don't think you can continue to roster him there. He is just on a massive pace, 33 plus fantasy points in 3 straight, which includes the 54 against Mississippi State. And that was a desperate game that they had to win. They did get the win in that one. And the close loss, of course, to Kentucky. But putting up some huge games, 27, 5, and 10, 18, 8, and 6, like some flirting with some triple-double type of numbers here. He does not fall in the category for me as a secondary spend up next to Broom. I just feel like it's a little bit too expensive for him, but he has got all the upside in the world, no doubt. We had the Jelon Morris slate the other night. He came through kind of for us, 28 fantasy points. Now his price is shot up to 7.7. Probably not there for him either, but he typically projects pretty well. And then I'm never rostering Sam Godwin. I know that Godwin put up a monster 38.5 against Mississippi State here recently, but that's just full scold. Where that gets interesting here is the sub 5K guards that aren't usually owned by the masses, but they do deserve some consideration here. Bryson Goodine there at 4.3. He's a shooter through and through. Chucks threes with reckless abandon, has a very nice shot rate, and makes them at a pretty high clip. He was a really great FanDuel play the other day, and 35 minutes there against Kentucky. We can expect 30 plus minutes. So he definitely is the Oklahoma play if you want one to consider. Duke Miles is also very cheap at 4.5. His price has fallen down because of 3 straight down games. He got his teeth knocked out. Well, not all of them, but some of his teeth knocked out against Mississippi State. And I don't know if that jostled something, but he played some pretty meaningless minutes against Kentucky, 29 in all, but he was only able to put up 12.5, and he was not looking to shoot whatsoever. So a little skittish on Duke Miles, but his full season rates are solid. So that's why you see he projects pretty decently if he plays 25 plus minutes over 4X, but that's one that I would caution against. I do prefer Bryson Goodine if we're going to use anybody on the Oklahoma side. Definitely not a necessity. We have endless. Here we are, another game, 8th game in, and another sub 5K guy that we can consider. The freshman Dalton Forsythe's kind of fallen out of the rotation a bit, and then Kobe Elvis, who has shown flashes at a myriad of the other schools he's been at, hasn't quite worked out, but he has scored 16 plus fantasy points in back-to-back games, 28 against Mississippi State, only 14 against Kentucky, which is a little worrisome, but he did still put up a pretty decent number for those 14 minutes. He's priced at only 3.7. So there is a ton of value here on the Oklahoma side, and I think that Ole Miss defensively Do you think Chris Beard? Do you think lockdown defense? But they've been pretty fantasy friendly as well. So this is one that I think we certainly want to get some exposure somewhere. I think most people will probably look to Morrell, but I think there's several options we can look at here. All right, going into the home stretch here. Texas Tech versus Kansas, total of 145.5. The Jayhawks are 4.5-point favorites. Housekeeping call here. Injury-wise, last time Texas Tech was on the slate, they were without Chance McMillan for a second straight game, and then Darion Williams was out as well. Whenever those guys are out, we just kind of have been plugging in Christian Anderson, which I think that would have to be the case here once again. It does sound, and my injury predictions have been pretty decent lately. See if I can get this right. I do believe Chance McMillan will miss this game, and I do believe Darion Williams will play this game. We'll see if that's how it happens. If that does happen, Christian Anderson is still very much in play, but we'll have some other things to have to sift through here. If Williams is also out, it puts more value in our lap here against the Jayhawks team that I think nobody is scared of at this point. So who are you liking in this one?
Well, it definitely depends on Williams. If Williams is out and Federico 3-5, I'd almost plug that in instantly. But if your tea leaves are saying that Williams might play, I mean, he's still in the player pool. I just wouldn't be locking him in necessarily. Christian Anderson, if both guys are out, I'd be comfortable probably going there. He just missed everything last game, but he played. I don't know if he played 40 minutes, but I watched the majority of that game. I don't think he left the floor. If he did, it was for a very brief stretch. So if both of the Tech guys miss again, I could go back to Anderson. Hopefully he'll have some better shot luck this time around. Federico for sure if they're both out, especially if Williams is out. Other than that, I mean, Hawkins, his usage rate is huge when those guys are out, but I think he's at 7.6 if I'm seeing that correctly. It's not a terrible play, but again, I think we could do better than that. And the Kansas guys, too, I'm sure you'll get to it, but there's nobody there that just absolutely jumps out to me. I'm not going to pay up for Dickinson this time around. He's more of a short slate guy. If he's at 10K and it's a 3-game Monday slate, I have some interest, but not on a 10-game slate like this. The rest of the guys, I mean, the Kansas is the one team where the prices for these guys, they rarely change. I mean, occasionally you'll get the Rylan Griffin. If he starts a couple games, he might go up a little bit. But the Dickinson, Harris, Mayo, KJ Adams, they're all priced pretty much the same as they always have been. So I'm not that interested in them going up against a tough Texas Tech team. But it really just depends on the injuries. I mean, unfortunately, it seems like this is one of the later games. It's a 2 p.m. Eastern start. So I don't know if we'll have an answer on Williams and McMillan before then. So it's one of those where if you want to leave some PMR and maybe be able to make a late swap, this is a game that could certainly have an impact if there's some extra injury news.
Yeah, definitely. And there's at least it's in that last window. So you have the Oklahoma Ole Miss game. 15 minutes later, St. John, Seton Hall. So there's some options to kind of pivot to there because, yeah, if Darion ends up being out, like, they'll love this matchup way more than the Houston matchup they were just involved in. And you'd mentioned Christian Anderson. He missed all of his shots, but yeah, he played every single minute. He took a ton of them, 11 total, and just, I mean, on the floor the entire time. And he had a great game for us at low rostership the game before as well. And that one was without just Chance McMillan. So, yeah, we might have to have 2 or 3 pieces of the last window there just to make some moves because I do think that decision could impact the slate enough to where it determines who wins and who doesn't. We saw a 6-man rotation against Houston there. Hawkins played 38, Anderson 40, Toppin 36, Kerwin Walton, who's still alive, 31 minutes, Federico 29, and then Kevin Overton 25. So you can pretty much play any of those 6 there if Darion and Chance McMillan are out because, like I said, I just don't fear Kansas like that right now. Toppin is really expensive at 10.5, so Anderson just kind of makes that most sense there. And I think a lot of people, when they build the superstars and super values type of lineups, they just automatically feel like, okay, I got to plug 2 or 3 top end guys in, and then the rest of my lineups got to be values. They don't ever really consider a player in that 6K range, but you can easily build with 2 at the top and another guy. I think Anderson makes a lot of sense as that kind of third piece that's not a sub 5K guy, which tells me his ownership is going to be low once again. But he can absolutely pan out here and put up a big number. The game before last without McMillan only against West Virginia, which is a tough defense and a slow, very slow team, he put up 21, 4, and 4. That was easily the best game of the season for him. He hit 5 threes in that one. So I'm just a big Anderson fan. I like him a lot. So we'll see how that shakes out. As for Kansas, I 100% agree. Hunter Dickinson, I only roster Dickinson when he's facing teams that are so far inferior to him, because he's just gonna. He knows he can push them around. This last one was Colorado. Was all over him against Colorado. I never usually roster him, but it was like, okay, this Colorado interior has no shot. What did he do? He put up a huge 55 fantasy point game. And you'll see whenever he plays inferior teams, that's just what's going to happen. Against better teams like this, you just don't see that level of play. He's very disinterested a lot. There's just Hunter Dickinson is just not that guy, man. Most people hate his attitude, and he just doesn't stay engaged enough. And if Darian Williams plays between him and Toppin and even Federico for sides, like they'll muscle him around and push him around. And that's one thing Hunter does not like is getting out physical. It's very easy to do so. If you have a front court player capable of bodying him, it really does mess with his mind and push him off kilter. So no Hunter Dickinson for me either. And I'm not if he's chalky, I'm not afraid of that. I don't think he will be, but yeah, no dice. KJ Adams, Dwan Harris, and Zeke Mayo, you said it well. They're usually priced where they are right now. Adams, I mean, shoot, he's going to play 34 plus minutes and still probably not get close to 4X. He may not even 3X. So it's really difficult to get excited about any of these guys. Flory Badunga is the only one that we love. And we know unless there's an injury, he's just not going to get enough minutes. Against Oklahoma State, game that turned into a blowout, he played 19 minutes and he put up 33 because he had 16 rebounds. Like, it's just it's a crime. It should be a crime punishable, but like life in prison to not play Flory Badunga 30 plus minutes. Like, it blows my mind. I can't wait to see where he transfers to, because I don't think he's staying at Kansas. He might, but I really doubt that. But he's awesome. If he were starting at 5'5", I'd be falling all over myself to play him. And I think everybody else would be too at this point. Really, the only guy I'd look at for Kansas is Rylan Griffin. You did small shout out there. 3.9K. He scored 20 plus fantasy points in back-to-back games against lesser opponents. Don't necessarily love him here against Texas Tech, but it's just another sub 4K guy that we can throw into the pile there and potentially consider. All right, let's move on to the last game here. Seton Hall versus St. John's. Total of 133.5. St. John's is a whopping 21.5 point favorite. They're getting ready to put the finishing touches on a Big East title, which, man, it feels like it has been a very long time. You have to go back to the Chris Mullen era, not the Chris Mullen coach era, but the Chris Mullen playing era at St. John's to find a Big East champion St. John's program. Shout out to Rick Pitino, because he has done his magic with this program, and they're fun to watch again, and I love it. There are several interesting pieces in this game. As far as injuries go, there are some names to drop here. Chauncey Jenkins for Seton Hall. He hasn't played in a long time, but he's on the report as questionable. Scotty Middleton is also questionable. He missed their last game. Somebody who's playing around 25, 26 minutes. So that is a lot of playing time to go around. And when he missed last game, that did enable Dylan Adewusu to come back in the starting lineup. And he had a massive, massive game last time out. On the St. John's side, Aaron Scott did hurt his knee apparently late in the game against Butler. Patino says it wasn't actually a knee. It was more like a lower leg foot thing. I'm not really sure, but I don't think it'll cause him any time or miss this game, but I do question how many minutes he'll actually get. So I've tentatively put him in around 27, 28 minutes. Usually Aaron plays 35 plus at this point, so that might be off. And if he does play his usual allotment of minutes, he's much more fantasy relevant there if he plays around 35. But he is priced up at 6'2", so it's not as if we're getting a major discount anymore on him, but he's been really good. But keep in mind, he does have that injury. If he misses, it makes Simeon Wilcher pretty interesting as a value piece. You do have the semi-revenge narrative here for Dylan Adewusu, if we want to go with that. He is priced at 5.8 after the big game, so his price has increased a little bit. He had 18, 7, and 6 against Villanova. Played 37 minutes because they just didn't have anyone else or anywhere else to turn to. Huge game for him. Now he's priced at 5.8. So you see in the projections wise, over 30 minutes, he is projecting pretty well even at 5.8. And the same with Prince of Ligby, who's priced down there at 4.4. So you can throw him into that value pile as well. I don't find myself looking to him too much. He has taken 19 shots in his past 2 games combined and scored over 21 in back-to-back. Again, Xavier and Villanova. St. John's is a different animal. They've got the front court to harass him. So not a lot of Prince of Ligby love for me there, but he does project pretty well. And I'd be completely ignoring the rest of Seton Hall, even Isaiah Coleman, who has been great. But St. John's has the horses to lock him up on the perimeter. On the St. John's side, RJ Lewis, Zuby Ejiofor, both guys that we have liked all throughout the season, been trading, playing Lewis one slate, playing Zuby the other. I do like RJ Lewis the most. He is 9.4. Perhaps he can be that second pay up for you. I think he's just going to put a tremendous beating on the Seton Hall team. We did see some major chalk on last St. John's slate from Davon Smith. He's priced there at 6.8. He was 6.5 last time out after a pretty big game against UConn. I would expect him to, especially if Aaron Scott's out, to see a sizable amount, maybe in the 40% range of ownership in single entry. So we'll see how that turns out. The real question here is if we want to go with the low-owned revenge narrative, Kadary Richmond, facing off against his former team here, Seton Hall, which they did face back in January, mid-January. It was a blowout, 20-plus point victory for St. John's. Kadary had about 30, so it's just an okay game, but he sat a lot of the second half. This is one, I took a long time thinking about this one. St. John's could be wrapped up here pretty early, and they have on the schedule, let me pull it up here, Marquette next Saturday, and it's on the road. So a win here kind of wraps things up, and they may just kind of sit guys against Marquette. So I'm kind of in a little hit or miss here. Are they going to play everybody huge minutes, blow these guys out, solidify the win, take the title, and then sit everybody against Marquette? Or are they kind of sleepwalk through this one? So it's hard to say. They're off for a week after this, but if they're going to play full allotment of minutes, regardless of blowout, and we can expect 35 plus from Kadary Richmond, I think he's a really good tournament look. Somebody that's not going to be on many radars and could potentially put up a 50 spot here. I think he's going to rack up a ton of steals. Obviously going to make shots, and then he contributes in all other categories. He is a bit of a Braden Smith light in terms of filling up the box score, but you remember at Seton Hall, without all these other guards on the team with him, he put up huge numbers often, and I think he can do that here. But definitely the blowout concern would worry me there, and if they kind of call off the dogs here in the second half. Would feel better about it if Aaron Scott can't go, because that is a lot of minutes and usage to go around for others, and I don't know that we can expect Sadikio Ebeen Ayo to be a god tier scorer that he was against DePaul, but maybe. After that, it gets kind of interesting with some of these secondary values. Again, Simeon Welcher at 4K would definitely be the starter without Aaron Scott, so that makes him viable. But I think this is a game that a lot of people may just ignore, even though it's a great fantasy environment for the St. John's side, just because it's the last game on the slate. I think a lot of people will be out of PMR by the time we get there. So I am apt to keep 2 or 3 pieces as we head into that final window based off that Texas Tech news. But there's some pretty high-powered fantasy assets in these 3 games, especially on the St. John's side, who is a program about to close on a Big East title for the first time in a million years. That's right, a million years. What do you think about this one?
Seton Hall's, their games are usually pretty gross, so I tend to avoid them whenever possible. But the Scott news certainly makes a lot of players more viable. If Scott's out, I probably go to Smith or Lewis would be my first 2 looks. Richmond, I wasn't on originally. I didn't jot him down in my notes, but you're right about the revenge narrative. And the one thing he's good at is just filling up every section of the box score. And I do tend to flock to players that can put up peripheral stats because they just have a higher floor naturally because of it. And I think you made a good point too. I don't think they want to lose this game or make this even a tight game, because if they can wrap things up going into that Marquette game, I think they'll play that kind of safe. Just take care of business against Seton Hall, maybe get some of the guys off their feet a little bit. So I think there will be some motivation here for St. John's, and especially if Scott's out, it's just going to be even more usage for the three guys that I mentioned. So I would have interest. The tricky thing is you have to probably save some PMR and create some flexibility in your lineup. But we were already talking about doing that with Texas Tech. So if you're not going to be on the Texas Tech guys, you could do the same thing with St. John's and kind of leave yourself some wiggle room there. And if I do at least have some interest, if the masses are going to ignore this game, I mean, that's a nice late afternoon game to have as your hammer. So it's certainly worth monitoring or considering.
Yeah, and I'm only basing that off of like I look at each slate and especially these all like longer day slates and seeing that people just don't save themselves PMR like ever. We just see people out beforehand, and a lot of times that'll be with games that are having injury designations, and I almost feel like it's like people are deciding like, oh, I don't want to deal with it, or I won't be around, or they're just blatantly just not paying attention. So there's been some pretty big edge for us on the news side. So that's why I think the St. John's game kind of comes in a little bit lower than expected, and that might just be because people think, oh, they're going to blow them out. They're projected to blow them out, wrap things up, and everybody will get like, low 20s minutes. But if Scott can't play, they don't have that option. So we can definitely leave some PMR and let the decision happen based off Texas Tech. If McMillan and Darian Williams end up playing and all of their guys don't end up quite as viable as we thought, then we can pivot 15 minutes later or and then wait 15 more minutes to that next game lock and get some St. John's exposure, because even in 30 minutes, RJ Lewis could throw down 50 against Seton Hall. And I just feel like Kadari Richmond, like a legacy style game from Kadari Richmond could happen. I don't know if I'll end up going there, but that's another one like Terrace Reed, where if you're building alt GPP lineups and you don't get some Kadari Richmond, I feel like that's a pretty big mistake. All right, so that is the slate. We wrapped that up. I did pull up the full projections here by X value, just to kind of to show who's popping up there. The Arkansas values, obviously, Jaleel Bethia of Miami, Matthew Morrell, Janai Broom. You see all these, so it's all these cheap guys, right? And then bam, Janai Broom. So it just really plays into that whole, the Yaxel. We'll call that the Yaxel effect. Like, you're an expensive guy, but you're a top 5, top 6 projection. Man, we're just not going to be able to fade you, regardless of how it even ends up. And then a lot of those other Pettiford, Sanders, Adewusu, Brennan Johnson. You see Chad Baker's pretty high on the list. That was a call out of yours. And then you got our guy, Terrace Reed, and then rounding out kind of the top 25 there is Julian Reese. So you can make a pretty good lineup here, paying up for Broom and Reese, and then just filling in with all these fairly cheap guys, Bethia, Morrell. Like, you can make a pretty damn strong lineup. So before I get into prize picks and prop talk, what's a core sound? What are you looking at for a 3-man core here? Drop one of those on us.
I'm kind of happy that you brought up the guys you did, because I have my core written down here. As soon as I finished taking notes, I had Reese, Brazil, and Broom. I think you could just go that way. And then there's enough value elsewhere. I didn't want to core any of the other guys who are cheap, because as we mentioned, of course, they're cheap for a reason. There could be landmines. You want to avoid those landmines, but I don't see Brazil as much of a landmine if he's going to get as many minutes as he did, or at least close to it at his price. And then Reese was one of the first guys I brought up on the show. I'm extremely interested in his price, and then obviously Broom. And you can make it work. So why not just take Broom, take Reese, and then take the most obvious value with Brazil? That's the 3-man core that I wrote down. It seems like we're headed in that direction.
No, I love it. That's the way to go for sure. And Brazil, the nice thing about him is he's had some bust games in these spots, but it's been because of fouls. And it's really like with the sheet, the projection sheet, it's really, I've always been cognizant of minutes, but I'm like staring at it all day, looking at it, like, talking to people. It's like, hey, if this guy plays, I've kind of transformed the way I speak. If this guy plays, 30 plus minutes, there's just no way he's gonna bust. Like, that's not a thing that's gonna happen. Certain players, they'll be standing in the corner playing 35 minutes doing nothing. David Thomas from DePaul, we learned that the hard way about him, right? Like, he's just gonna stand in the corner for 35 minutes. Like, he's just not. Minutes don't mean anything for him. For Brazil, it does. If he plays 30 minutes, he's gonna do enough to break the slate. Now, he may get 2 fouls. He may go Terrace Reed and get 3 fouls in the first half. Like, Then he ends up playing 15 minutes, and then it's like, oh, what? This guy busted. Why do we play him? And we have that. We see that a lot. Not as much in our community, but we do see that sometimes. It's like there's just you gotta really recognize, like, okay, 8.2 fouls per 40. I am taking a risk here, but if he gets those minutes, we're going to be good. And Brazil's safe in that manner because if he plays that time, it's just like Yannick the other day for Penn State. I kept harping, like, if he plays, man, he's going to crush it. He played and he crushed it. So, yeah, Brazil's the safest value. All these other guys, you just can't say that about. Julio Bethia, he could play 30 minutes and they could be empty minutes. Although he is really good, we know that that can happen with Denver Jones. He's a bit of a corner stander. We know Elijah Saunders inexplicably can disappear. Jordan Longino, like, there's just a lot of risk here. But there's 4 Miami guys in the top 20 of expected value. So that's a little bit scary in its own right. For me, core-wise, yeah, it'd be like the Adu or Brazil, possibly both. I think that's pretty obvious. Janai Broom in lockstep with you there. And then for me, I'm pretty high on Divine Ugochukwu. I think that'll be the second value for me behind Brazil and even ahead of Bethia. I just feel a little more comfortable and confident in him. I think coming in, North Carolina will know, Miami will butter their biscuits by having Bethia take shots. So I think he'll have to face some of that defensive pressure, and I think Divine will do a little bit better. So that's where my head's at the moment. Prize picks, I have a couple. I'll be analyzing the prop stuff. I've been tracking props. Looks like props ended up pretty well tonight off the sheet there. I finally have been waiting for accuracy on those. We've been releasing the projection sheet with just the fantasy points. Now we're releasing it with the total stats, and it's been going pretty well. So on prize picks, there are a few here that I wanted to bring up, but there'll be a lot tomorrow that I will have and kind of post those in the Discord as well and provide some on Twitter as well. But these are the ones I'm looking at currently. Your man Julian Reese versus Penn State, 13.5 points on prize picks. Definitely like the over 13.5 there. That should be no problem for him. Again, as long as he doesn't get into any kind of foul trouble, he should do extremely well. Providence taking on UConn. It's a tough spot. Osin Erhuunzi at UConn. They have him as a projection of 7. I do like his under 7 points. Now, I like Oswin as a play, and I've used him a few times here, but that UConn front court is not going to be kind to him. I don't think he's going to be in a position to score even 4 points, let alone 7. So we'll take the under 7 there. And then one more. Scroll down here and just make sure it is still available. All right, it is. Let me just, my man Luke Kearney, let me just make sure it's still available on the assist part. Sorry. All right, let's see. They took away his assist prop. Luke Kearney's assist prop has been a generational wealth. His PRA, he's on Air Force playing New Mexico. It is a home game, I believe, for Air Force. 14.5 points, rebounds, assists. I will take his over 14.5 points, rebounds, and assists. And if I get his 0.5 assists on Caesars again, I'll be slamming that over again as well. It's been like minus 180, minus 200. Yeah, it's juiced, but that's just a freebie. So I will be all over Luke Kearney here against a tough New Mexico team as well. So that will take us out of here. Content-wise, you can expect a main slate breakdown to drop in the morning. I'm also going to add the afternoon and night slate cores on that, so it's going to have everything laid out. The projection sheets are all going to be pretty early as well in the Discord for all 3 slates. I know there's a 4th one, but it's 3 games from the night slate, so it won't be separated. And then also we'll have all the news. Obviously, we'll wake up. There'll be lots going on. So at FTN, DFS Fantasy Discord is the place to be. You'll see in the links in the bottom there below us at the very bottom, FTN pricing page. Check that out. There is a March Madness discount going on, which can get you up to 25% off. It's a great time to check us out. And there is the DFS Plus and betting package, which gets you access to everything that we offer. We have a March Madness landing page that's dropping that's going to have coverage of every single conference tournament. Thoughts, our bracket shows, bracket picks, everything that you need to be a purveyor of green screens and window trips, because that is what we deal here at the Super Show and FTN. I think that will take us out of here. Adam, thank you so much for hanging out. Appreciate it. You know, the designation of the first guest this far into the season. I've just been flying solo, but first co-host of the season. I appreciate it. Glad it was you, and you're welcome back anytime. We have the bracket show live show coming up. I don't know what I'll talk to you off air about your schedule there, but if you're available, certainly would love to have you on there. We'll be having 3 or 4 people there kind of giving live reactions, but looking forward to a profitable baseball season with you as well, and just wrapping with you here in the next few hours. So appreciate it. What any final thoughts on the slate or anything else you want to do before we head out?
Yeah, is that late slate tonight or tomorrow? Does it include St. Mary's? I think it does.
You talking about the 3-gamer?
The 3-gamer really late at night. Does that include St. Mary's?
So Gonzaga, San Francisco, Oregon State, St. Mary's, and West Virginia, BYU. I think those are all on the night slate, though, right?
Yeah, that sounds great to me. I love St. Mary's slates. I love Gonzaga slates. Yeah. That's going to be one I'll play heavily, and I'm hoping that the rest of the industry just is in bed at that point. It seems like we get a lot of edge in those late slates, so that's one that caught my eye. And hopefully St. Mary's can bounce back. I stacked them last night, hoping for a late night hammer, and they, I think, only scored 58 points. So yeah, I'm hoping to go back there. So I'm interested. But yeah, anytime, also just in general, anytime you want to have another guest on, I'm almost always available. I love coming on the show. I can't believe I'm the first guest.
Just been flying solo this year, man. Just doing my thing.
All right. Well, if you ever need another one, I'm here. So
yeah, now that we're going to be extending to like 4 and 5 days a week here, I'll definitely, my voice will blow out if I don't. So I'm definitely going to have you back, and we'll see about having some others on there. But yeah, I appreciate you very much. Good luck tomorrow and this weekend. And we'll be back, let's see, Tuesday early, probably about 10 a.m. PST Tuesday to break down the Tuesday slate, a daytime show there. And then after next week, there will be 5 shows per week. So we'll be grinding through here. Lots of slates, daytime hoops with the conference tournaments, just the best time of year. I know a lot of people love the October for the World Series and the Super Bowl. And obviously it's all great stuff, but man, March Madness, the best time. And we've already seen over the last 3 nights, multiple buzzer beaters to get us in that mindset. Love it. How can you not be romantic about this sport? Romantic about baseball, sure, but this sport, come on.
Don't talk about the buzzer beater from last night, Michigan State. Don't bring them up on this show. I mean, I know I've had some spicy takes in the past, not as many this year with Zach Edey out of the league, and AJ Hogard no longer on Michigan State. But yeah, Michigan State, I'm still a hater. So that was not fun seeing Holloman hit that shot.
For sure. And I can't wait for the bracket show. We can get all the spiciest of takes there on teams that get in.
Oh, we appreciate it,
man. Yep. Take care, everybody. Best of luck.